Hey everybody, and welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and we have all sorts of awesome things for you today from NZXT. The main event though is the brand new H7 FLOW RGB case. Now this is essentially a re-release of a case that was announced and released a few years ago. This though has been tweaked from head to toe with new features and new design and lots more things besides. So we have already built a PC in this today. We're going to be doing a full build, thermal testing, and coming to some conclusions at the end. So what's new about this case? Well, NZXT has introduced a vertical power supply, which means that we have the whole of the bottom of the case pretty much open to fans and radiators and all that kind of stuff. It's also quite a tall case. It's not very deep, but it is quite tall, which means that we get excellent radiator support in here as well. In fact, you can fit a 420mm radiator in the front of the case. And even more impressive is that you can fit a single row of fans and a 60mm radiator, or even two rows of fans on that size of radiator, and still fit a 4-slot graphics card in here. It is a very, very good use of space in here. There's excellent cable routing, tool-free design, and I like the way that it looks as well. I think it's pretty cool. So in terms of the pricing, we have $130 for the RGB FLOW, the H7 FLOW that we've got here today. Now that does still include fans, but if you want the RGB, and you actually get one of these things as well, the F360 RGB Core, one of these fan frames with 320mm fans embedded in it, you can go for the RGB version, which is what we've got here. So that includes one of those things in the front. There's no rear fan, but as we take a look in a minute, that doesn't really seem to impact thermals, even if you're going to use a CPU air cooler. So we've got a liquid cooler in here at the moment. Now, we've got some other stuff here today. We just mentioned these things, the F360 RGB Core, essentially a fan frame. And the reason why I love these things is because they have 3 fans in it, or you actually get 280mm and 240mm versions as well. We've got the 360mm version here with 3 fans. You're reducing the screw count that you need to deal with when it comes to installing these fans or to a radiator or to your case. You're reducing the screw count from 12 to just 4 screws, 1 in each corner. You also reduce the cables as well. So this thing actually has a single cable running off it that controls the speed and RGB lighting of all of the fans. So that then splits into either PWM if you want to use that, and a proprietary RGB connector to control the fans using an NZXT hub, but you can also control the RGB lighting using a standard 3-pin header as well. So loads of flexibility here. I love these things. They are super cool. Now, in terms of the pricing for them though, we are looking at around $70 for one of these things, or about £60 in the UK. Now, when you look at some of the high-end RGB fan kits, like a trio of clip together RGB fans, that kind of thing, they're not going to come up much less than that, I don't think. So if you are after a premium experience and also a very convenient experience, because this thing, you can install it in a matter of seconds, 4 screws and you're done. But if you try and do that with 3 fans, dealing with all those cables and the extra time spent cable tidying, I just hate dealing with that. I honestly hate it. It's one of the worst parts of building a PC. This thing makes it a breeze. So if you want that extra convenience and something that you can swap around between cases as well, definitely worth looking at. We've got 2 of them in here today, and we've got 2 of them in the case as well. There's a recess in the bottom of the FLOW RGB, just for one of these, or for extra fans as well. So it looks really, really great in the bottom there, which we'll have a much bigger look at that later. Now, we've got another very special hardware launch today. We have the C1500 Platinum. This is a monster 1500 watt platinum rated power supply, and we're going to be using it with the build today. In fact, it's in there right now. And this thing is pretty crazy because it has 2 600 watt PCI Express 5 16-pin connectors for NVIDIA's latest graphics cards. So you are not going to be wanting 4 connectors and cables with this power supply. So thanks NZXT for sending over the case, the power supply, and both of the RGB Core fan frames as well. We've used all of them in the build today. So what we're going to do is crack on with a build, have a look, walk around at the case, looking at all its features. We're going to be talking about the things that I love and things that I don't like so much about the H7 FLOW RGB. We're then going to be looking at the thermal results. We're going to throw in a single fan in the rear to see if you actually need to buy any top and bottom fans and just what difference they all make. And then we will come to some conclusions at the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It just really helps punch me through the algorithm and gets me noticed. And also don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Really, really helps. Again, it gets me noticed and just enables me to carry on doing this channel. Loads of ways you can show your support to the channel below. You can even buy me a coffee or just send your thanks using any of the links down below. And all of this hardware will be available in the links down below. And I just make a small cut from those links. And don't forget to check out my Amazon shop as well with all the best hardware that I have tried and tested here on the channel. I haven't just built pretty PCs with it, I've actually tested it as well. So don't forget to check out those links for tried and tested hardware. That's it from me. Let's crack on with the review. So we're going to get up close and personal with the H7 FLOW RGB now then, and I should state that this is the RGB version of the case. The key difference is that you get one of these in the front panel, an F360 RGB Core. So that's all you get pretty much over and above the non-RGB version of the case. The non-RGB version still comes with 3 fans in the front section, but you don't get all the snazzy lighting that you get on one of these. So we're going to have a quick whip around the exterior, have a look at all the fan mounts and everything else, and then we're going to dive into the case and see what we actually get. So lots of design tweaks over the original H7 FLOW. There was an original version of this case out a couple of years ago. So we're going to have a look at the front panel first, and here, as you can see, this is the fan frame, the F360 RGB Core, pre-installed into the case. The idea is, usually with these things, that they're meant to make the installation of all your fans a lot easier. So it's I'm sort of wondering why NZXT went with this in the front panel, but I'm guessing it's probably because of the lighting. So there's going to be a whole load of RGB going on in the front of this case. If that's your thing, you're going to love it. So one thing I would mention is if you're removing this thing, which is really easy to do, just by unscrewing these screws here, and then straight out comes the whole radiator tray. Just make sure that you feed the cables back in down here properly, because they do tend to snag on the front panel. So radiator support here up to 360mm if you're going with 120mm fans and radiators, or even a 3 times 140mm radiator, so 420mm. That fits in here as well. So there are a couple of AIO liquid coolers that you might want to consider if you're doing that. There's so 420mm, so 340mm fans. Obviously, this case really water cooling friendly as well. So we're just going to put the front panel back on. As you can see, tool-free design all over with this case. Absolutely love it. There's not really any kind of vibration with these panels as well. Just a tiny bit if I tap on them, but once all your hardware is installed, usually that helps dampen things down a bit, and a far cry from the really awful vibration on one of the panels that we saw on the Dan Case A3 Micro ATX recently. If you want to check out that review, you can see it in my recent videos. So the top panel, again, tool-free. And we have a pretty fine mesh on this case. It's something that's been tweaked over the original version. And removing that gives you great access to the roof of the case. The only thing I would have liked to have seen here is a removable radiator mount, because I generally prefer to have my radiators in the roof of the case rather than the front, because the warm air is just expelled straight out of the case rather than being dumped into it. A pretty significant offset here away from your motherboard. So you'll probably be able to fit most radiator types in here. What I'll do is I'll bring up on the screen right now the radiator variations rather than going through everything on the video, because if you're not going to be water cooling or putting radiators in all the mounts, it's kind of pointless information for you. So I'll just put those diagrams on the screen now. So as we can see here, the RGB core, the fan frame that we've got a couple of these to try out on the case today, and that fits there with no problems at all in the roof. Obviously you don't want to have it on the roof, but I'm just kind of showing you how everything kind of lines up and how much space you've got on this side of the case away from the motherboard. So that is the side of the case. So the rear of the case, fairly standard. We get a option of 140mm or 120mm fans here, and you have the adjustable mounts as well, so you can move it up and down depending on where your CPU cooler is, if you want to line it up with that, of course. And down here we get the unique feature of the case, which is a vertical power supply mount, and NZXT has done that primarily to allow the fact that this is a standard case, really. It's not a dual chamber case technically, certainly a lot narrower and a much smaller footprint than a dual chamber case. Down here we have the option of dropping in 3 120mm fans. So I am just going to pull the side panel off, again tool free, and lean that up against something so it doesn't fall and destroy my office. And here we can see just an example. We've got the F360 RGB Core down here in the base. And the reason for NZXT doing this is primarily to cool your graphics card. So just dropping it down in there. Obviously the case designed to work with the RGB Core fan frames, and you get a nice flush finish there as well. Now, the only downside I can see here is that, as you can see, like top down, your graphics card is kind of going to finish here, which is maybe just over half, maybe 2/3 of the fan width, kind of going in from the side panel. So these fans aren't going to be sitting directly underneath your graphics card. So probably limited benefit from having these in here, to be honest. I mean, some airflow pointed at your graphics card is better than no airflow, but I think the only way NZXT could have done it differently is just having a slightly different power supply mount and doing it in the normal way, or completely moving the power supply down the other end of the case or something like that. So it's a great idea, but it remains to be seen what the benefit will be, because these fans are a fair way out from the center of the case, and the center of the case is kind of where they need to be to sit where your graphics card is. Your graphics card is basically going to be here, and if I look at top down, you can kind of see that only a small proportion, maybe the last third of the fan, is actually pointing at it. So hopefully there'll be some kind of airflow divergence kind of going out in a V shape, kind of like that, upwards, and the graphics card will be getting more airflow than it looks like it will be here. But yeah, just remains to be seen what benefit that will be. But obviously, for aesthetic reasons, this thing will look absolutely great. Now, something I might even be tempted to do for a little bit of RGB lighting pizzazz is to actually mount this thing on the underside of the case like that, because you're still going to get the airflow going into the case. You've still got this mesh here. Fans might get a little dusty, maybe over time. But what that will do, because it's kind of completely flush under here, is the RGB lighting from the fans and this light strip here will be pointing down onto your desk. So that could give a really cool look to the H7 FLOW RGB. So I might actually try that later, purely for aesthetic reasons, just to see how it looks, because I reckon that's going to look pretty sweet underneath the case there. So what we'll do now is have a look at some of the other interior features. So we've got a cable cover here, and that is actually removable from the rear side of the case. So if you want to route your cables through and then replace this thing over the top of them, you can do that, or there's plenty of room here to actually just route them through normally. So I'm gonna head round the far side of the case now, and here we are with the rear panel. Now, this for me is probably one of the best rear panels that I've seen on a case, certainly in my top 5, maybe top 10 cases. I mean, we have seen a lot of great cases recently, but I think in terms of ease of use and just looking at this thing, how easy it appears, it is really, really good. So we've got loads and loads of cable ties, and the thing I absolutely love about this is that we've got the extra depth provided by the power supply being mounted vertically. This panel has been able to kind of be enlarged a little bit. So we've got huge clearance here between the side panel and where you'll be mounting your cables. So here, for example, probably where you're going to have your ATX connector for the motherboard, the 24-pin connector, is so much space, so much clearance to house your cables. And also in here, you can easily get that connector and loads of other ones under these Velcro ties. You've got more Velcro ties here if you want to route your cables that way, and of course going up here to the 8-pin motherboard connector, you've got some up here as well. So I really, really love the cable tidying layout here, and with the cable cover, things are just going to look really sweet. So I think it's a great case for hiding those cables. The only thing you have to be careful of is that no cables kind of stray out into the main chamber over here. That might be a possibility, and you'll just want to pay extra careful attention to make sure that your cables are kind of tucked up here and not tucked down here, because you will be able to see them through that little slat down there as well. So not entirely sure why NZXT didn't just kind of completely block off that section down there. I think that might have helped with the aesthetics a little bit. Something else that's worth mentioning is white case and white cables. So that's often something that's missed on cases, and I know that a lot of you have mentioned it in my comments before with white cases when they include black cables. We have white cables here, so no complaints with the actual cables that are included with the case. So as we can see, there's quite a few options for mounting hard disks. I think you've got a couple of options there, and these things double as SSD mounts as well. And you also have a removable SSD bay down in the base of the case as well. So if you don't have any 2.5-inch SSDs, you can remove that. I'd also get rid of this thing here if you don't have any hard disks in your case as well. So just getting rid of that would just make your life a little bit easier as far as cable tidying goes. You also have to remove that to get at the motherboard area cut out to potentially access a backplate for a CPU cooler as well. So loads of water cooling options in this case, very water cooling friendly, AIO friendly, and loads of clearance for air coolers as well. So whether you're going for an air cooled case or a water cooled case, the H7 FLOW RGB looks like it's going to be absolutely awesome. So here we are with the finished PC, and doesn't it look absolutely fantastic in this case? But first, I wanted to go through a few things that I absolutely love and a few things that I don't like so much about the NZXT H7 FLOW RGB. So to start with then, I love the overall look and design of this case and the fact that it is quite tall but not particularly deep, and that gives rise to some excellent radiator and water cooling support in this case. We've got loads of space down here thanks to that vertical PSU mount, so you can fit a 60mm radiator or 60mm thick radiator down here in the base. We've got loads of space in the front for a radiator as well, and that's all while housing one of the largest graphics cards on the market, the RTX 4090, and this one is huge. It's the Palette Game Rock, so loads of options for water cooling hardware. Also, the rear of the case looks absolutely fantastic with all the cable tidying tools, Velcro ties, and the channels for running your cables through. Finally, I do love the inset here for the fan frame. So you don't obviously have to use the fan frame down here. You can potentially use something, a bunch of your own fans or something like that. But I just really like the way that everything sits flush at the bottom of the case here. And it's easy to forget this isn't a dual chamber case. It is a standard ATX tower case, and you don't often see this kind of feature in cases like this. Now for some things that I'm not too keen on with the case. The problem that we have in the base, while the fan frame, and we've just removed it for a second, while this looks great when it's actually in that mount down there, if you don't intend to populate this lower section with fans, then the problem that you have is that you get a really unsightly view of your power supply and cables down there. So what I would have liked to have seen is just another metal flange, or just a sheet of metal just going across here to hide your power supply and cables from view. Another thing I would have liked to have seen is up the top here, a pull-out radiator tray. It would just make it a little bit easier to install your radiators and hardware, and there are plenty of other cases out there that do this. Now, with a tool-free design does come a little bit of a trade-off in terms of how secure these panels are. There is a little bit of rattling going on with this case for the simple reason that the thumb screws aren't here to lock everything down. Now, I didn't notice any vibration with this case at all, which is really, really good because it probably means you're not going to see any in your case either. And it is a far cry from the situation that we saw with the recent Dan case A3 Micro ATX, which had a very clanky panel on the outside side panel. But here, while there is a bit of a noise when tapping the panels, I haven't noticed any noise even during the cooling test when we ramped up all the fans. Our thermal testing hardware includes a Be Quiet cooler strapped to a stock speed Core i5 12600K, and we also have an AMD Radeon 7900 XT with its fans locked at 50% speed so it doesn't spin up or down and gives us consistent results. We use Cinebench to get a CPU temperature, which is the average temperature across all of the P cores on the Core i5 12600K, and we run a looped Metro Exodus benchmark to get the graphics card temperature. Moving on to the thermal results now then, and we have a number of test results for the H7 FLOW RGB in both CPU and GPU graphs. So the reason for that is because the standard one is just the case out of the box with the 320mm fans in the fan frame installed to the front of the case as an intake. We then added a rear fan as well to see if that maybe helped CPU thermals, and then we added two more fan frames, one in the roof and one in the base, to see if they aided either the CPU or the GPU thermals. So as we can see here, a reasonable result for the H7 FLOW RGB out of the box, 74 degrees, so a little bit cooler than other tower cases with the mesh front, such as the Masterbox TD500 Mesh V2 from Cooler Master. However, the NZXT H6 was actually slightly better out of the box. So when we added a rear fan, that knocked, about 1 degree off the CPU temperature. But if we had the rear fan plus 3 in the base and 3 in the roof, I think the airflow was just kind of getting a little bit mixed up in there. There was about 1 degree difference, so not really improving things here. So the CPU cooler doing a pretty good job of cooling this CPU as much as you can, even without a rear fan in the case. So a rear fan is definitely not necessary or required in this case. But again, I would maybe suggest that the mesh on this case is fairly dense, so it is maybe restricting airflow a little bit as well. Now moving on to the GPU temperature, and this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So the NZXT H FLOW RGB, really, really good out of the box, and you'd kind of expect it to be because there is a huge gap between the GPU and the base of the case. So even with no fans in the bottom at all, we saw a really, really low GPU temperature, which is actually much better than the NZXT H6 and a lot better than the Cooler Master Masterbox TD500 Mesh V2. So adding a rear fan, obviously not really making that much of a difference to the GPU because it's all the way up behind the processor cooler. And the first time we see a significant drop in the GPU temperature is when we add the 3 base fans. So they're obviously pointing somewhat in the direction of the GPU. They're not directly in line with it because they are offset a little bit. And adding 3 roof fans only dropped the GPU temperature by another degree. So what I would suggest is definitely go for at least 1 fan in the base, ideally 3, because you're going to be not only dropping your GPU temperature, but you are also going to be covering up all of the holes that NZXT has left with views through to your ugly power supply and cables down there. So what do we make of the NZXT H7 RGB FLOW then? Well, obviously you have the option of going with the cheaper non-RGB case that still comes with fans. Doesn't really end up being a whole lot cheaper, and I think you'll end up agreeing with me here that I think you need the lighting in the front panel. I just think it looks really, really great, and I just love the way that this thing looks. The RGB Core fan frames, they're not for everybody. But I think if you're going for premium fans and you want to cut down on the cables and the screws like you can with the clip-together fans that are available from lots of different companies these days, you're not going to be spending much less than these things. And while lots of people out there say, oh, well, you know, it's a great way to waste money on your PC, if you want something that looks great and you want to make it your own and you want a convenient PC building experience every time you use one of these things, there is absolutely nothing wrong with them. I absolutely love them. I think they look great in this PC, especially because, unlike a lot of fans out there, they actually have the RGB strips down the sides and the ends as well. They just make this case really, really stand out. So in terms of the features, it's not revolutionary, it's more of an evolution of the original H7 Flow. Still pretty good cooling, especially for your graphics card. Amazing cable routing as well, a joy to work in, tool-free design, and loads of space for water cooling hardware and all that kind of stuff inside, even if you want to go for massive graphics cards as well. So I'd like to thank NZXT for sending over all the hardware today. Don't forget to check it out in the description below. And if you found today's review informative, you can send your thanks in a variety of ways down in the links below as well. All the links are affiliate links down below as well, so I just take a small cut from that, which helps to keep me running this channel. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. It just helps punch me through the algorithm. Thanks to NZXT again, and I'll be back very, very soon.